Hello? Yeah. Yes.
Got a technical difficulties.
Ms. Schilling, can you hear us now?
Hello, I can. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My apologies, there was no audio. I hope you're still on HB0081.
Yes, we are.
Wonderful.
If we could have your comments, please.
Sure, I just want to express my support for the bill as amended to provide an additional exemption to the mortgage lender licensing requirements. Why I'm interested in this, as you know, a lot of Wyoming residents are struggling with the high costs of housing. And I work with a community housing consulting firm. And a number of our clients are employers. We help them develop employee housing strategies. And a lot of the employers we work with are struggling with employee recruitment and retention, largely due to high housing costs. So one of the tools that would really help them are down payment assistance programs. And this would, be in limited circumstances like you're talking about, less than five, loans a year. And what we have found is that employees can often make the monthly mortgage payments, but they struggle to save the 20% that's typically required for a down payment, especially in high cost areas. And we've also found that while the existing programs available through the state, down payment assistance like through WCDA, they're great, but they aren't often quite to the scale that will work in these higher cost communities. Um, I was able to listen into your conversation on Friday, and just thought I'd share, we're working with a client right now in Montana who's setting up a down payment assistance program, and they have an exception in their code. I'm not a lawyer, but they exempt a person who is making 4 or fewer loans per year. So I hope you're able to find a way to do this that's in compliance with the SAFE Act. And my apologies, I wasn't able to hear the previous speaker's testimony there. But in short, I would just say I hope you pass this bill to help employers and employees in the state and add another tool to the housing toolbox here in Wyoming. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for testifying. Any questions from the committee? No? Thank you very much. Sorry for the delay.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Ms. Riceland, can you hear us? Oh, you might be muted.
Try it again.
There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Very nice to see you. Thanks for testifying today. If we could have your comments?
Thank you. I'd like to testify regarding voting and potential restrictions on identification of
Oh,
individuals
you know what?
wanting to vote.
I think we may be on the wrong bill for you. That's
Okay.
coming.
This was the link I was given. That's why. Okay. I'm not sure why I was given the link. I apologize for
Do
the
you know what,
inconvenience.
do you know what bill you're waiting for?
Yes, House Bill 206.
Okay, yeah, if you just wait online a little bit longer, we'll get to that one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, any other people online?
Mr. Chairman, no.
Okay. At this time, I will close public testimony. And committee, what's your pleasure?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by Representative Yin. Do we have a second?
I'd second.
Seconded by Vice Chairman Locke. All right. Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move the proposed amendment that I passed out to the committee, if that's appropriate.
Yes. So we have a motion for the amendment by Representative Yin. Do we have a second? Okay. Seconded by Representative Webb. All those in favor of the, well, you want to present the amendment or you okay? Okay. All right, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Amendment carries. Are there any other amendments? Okay, seeing none. Let's go ahead and call for the question. Would you go ahead and poll the committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on House Bill 81, Regulatory Reduction Mortgage Loan Originator Licensing. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Locke?
Aye.
Representative Heft? Representative Johnson?
No.
Representative Lucas?
Aye.
Representative Webb?
Aye.
Representative Weber?
Aye.
Representative Yin?
Aye.
Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Chairman Knapp, we have 8 ayes, 1 no.
All right, House Bill 81 receiving an affirmative vote does pass the committee. On to the next bill will be House Bill 177. This is Statutory Standing Committee, Federal Review.
Mr. Chairman, I have a handout from Representative Wharf. I'll pass that out now.
Yes, Matt, thank you. Welcome, Representative Wharf. Thank you for your patience in scheduling this one. Why don't you go ahead and start and present your bill?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Corporations Committee. I have before us House Bill 177. It's a Statutory Standing Committee Federal Review. And really what this is all about, you know, we currently have several standing committees that exist today. They were all basically created upon statehood. And we've gone round and round and round trying to figure out how to do this. But as you guys all are well aware, when we passed the 17th Amendment, we changed the way our government functions. Since 1913, we no longer, as an elected body of legislators, select our U.S. senators. They're voted by the people. The people now make that election. And over the years, their primary focus of protecting state sovereignty and states' rights has kind of evolved and changed. And so really why I'm here before you today is to address this problem. I would believe that most would agree that we see a problem with our growing government. We see the federal government operating outside its enumerated powers, consequently at the expense of state government and largely impacting us. So that's really what this bill is designed. It is designed for this body to create a standing committee that would have the ability to look at all the federal actions that are taking place. And probably the most important part to me, you know, it sets up on page 2. I'm not going to walk through it and read it all, but on page 2 it says that we're going to review federal actions, determine if the sovereignty of the state of Wyoming and its powers, rights, and liberties of its citizens are legally defined during that ratification debate when we had our Constitution and we were adopted in as the 44th state of the Union. We agreed to certain things, and it's my belief that that's kind of been diminished over the time. And so that's the first thing it would be set up to do, is to review the federal actions. The II on page 3 to me is one of the most important. It talks about the committee would ascertain and make findings as to which federal actions are not consistent with the enumerated roles, responsibilities, and powers of the United States government in the United States Constitution. And so to me, that's one of the most important parts of what this does. And I'm going to go on and read it. It continues on to say, this duty shall be exercised without regard for any United States Supreme Court or other judicial decisions that attempt to interpret federal actions, such as unconstitutional assertions assumed by the federal judiciary that undermine our Republican form of government, because only legislators can create and revoke laws. And then the last thing is III. It says we report and submit those recommendations to the legislature. And I do think there's been plenty of examples that exist wherein, had we had this standing committee that was in place, I look at the actions that took place involving a federal agency that manages the lands in the state, several of the federal lands here. There were some actions that were taking place that I really don't believe they had any authority to do what they did, but Congress is who they're accountable to. And if we had a committee like this, we could have called those people, the directors that are here in Wyoming, we could have called them before this body and actually had a hearing to determine whether or not they were operating with any statutory or any constitutional authority to change or implement the rules that they were trying to impose on the state. Another one that we just saw was the grizzly bear. I'm tired, we've delisted the grizzly bear twice. It was up for a third time. And the last administration going out the door, last thing they did is said, we're not going to delist them again. And they want to expand. Once again, they're moving the goalpost. They're expanding what our obligation is to recover grizzly bears. So those are just two very real examples in my mind, recent examples. You can go back, the COVID-19, the stuff that we had to deal with the mask mandates. I think had we had a committee like this in place, it would have given us the opportunity to look at that, and as a legislative body, we could have exercised the rights that we've been given, the authority we've been given to represent the people. We're all duly elected, and I believe that as a state legislature, we have a lot more power and authority than we've asserted. And that's what I'm trying to do, is stand up a committee to actually push back. I don't think our only recourse should be to have to turn to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not the federal government's following a contract that we agreed to as a state when we were adopted as a 44th state to join the union. The last thing in the bill that I want to point out, Mr. Chairman, is Section 4 at the very end on number 5, page 5, Section 4. It says, "This act is effective immediately upon completion of all acts necessary for a bill to become law as provided by Article 4, Section 8 of the Wyoming Constitution." And I had that put in because I wanted to make sure that this committee, I would like it to be as permanent as all the others. When I first brought this up, when I was first elected in 2020, I was encouraged to run a subcommittee bill, to establish a subcommittee. As you well know, Mr. Chairman, subcommittees can come and go, and I wanted to set something up a little bit more permanent. And so in the course of conversation with my LSO attorney that was helping me draft this, one of the things that I thought of is, what would be the trigger to say we no longer need this? And I think the state would no longer need to do this if our federal government returned to the way it was when it was initially set up. And we as a legislative body were able to elect our US senators again and have them focus their primary attention on states' rights, state sovereignty. Until that time happens, and I think that's a heavy lift right now. Someday that may happen, but I think we cannot as a state afford to continue on down this path where the federal government kind of goes unchecked. I believe we all took an oath to protect and defend the US Constitution as well as the Wyoming Constitution. And I think this committee would allow us to fulfill that obligation to protect the rights of the people that elected us and sent us down here to protect them from an overbearing government. With that, I will just say real quick, on the back there's a fiscal note. It says $60,000. I'm assuming that that's primarily what they're estimating the cost would be for interim topics, for having the meetings throughout. It's not like we're going to have to elect more legislators. It'll be put together with the body that's here. I don't think we would have to hire another LSO attorney to take care of the group. I think they would just assign those attorneys that are here. So I'm assuming most of that is going to be associated with the interim type meetings, the meetings that we would be having, hearings, any hearings that we should have. So that to me, $60,000 is a drop in the bucket. If you think about what it costs the state today to have the federal government operating outside its enumerated powers, I think this is a drop in the bucket. We're losing way more by allowing the government to be unchecked and to not follow the Constitution we all agreed to. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to touch on this. This was a great document, I thought, that was put together by Tammy Young, who's going to be testifying. I wanted you all to have it so that you could reference it as she talks about it. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to answer any questions that the committee may have about House Bill 177.
Thank you, Representative Worf. Are there any questions? Vice Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Worf. So let me just make sure I kind of have a picture of how this would operate. So there would be large, this is just my interpretation, there would be large things like maybe these RMP issues or those kinds of things that you would review. But would you also see this committee as being for certain bills, almost like appropriations because they're money, but certain bills because there's some federal entanglement on a bill? Would you see that as a referral type of situation that this committee would also review? Thank you.
Representative?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Locke, I do. I think this committee, I think, would have plenty of opportunity to do a lot of things, but that is one of them, is to look at any of the entanglements that are put out there. I mean, I know we've all heard from people at home about, kind of the way that the federal government has gotten kind of around those enumerated powers is they've kind of said to the states, they hold out those dollars and they say, do you want this? Do you want this? Do this. And I think it would also give us the ability to let the executive branch know that as a legislative body, we do not agree with that action. And I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about things before they're in place. And it's always easier, I believe, to deal with it before it's set up and becomes established. But yes, in answer to your question, I think it would give us that opportunity.
Other questions? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Worf, I appreciate you having a built-in repealer. I feel like we need more bills that have built-in repealers when we feel like they're accomplished. Even though, I think it'll be hard to see the repeal of the 17th Amendment. I'm curious on why you didn't just bring a rule change and have us add a standing committee via rule.
Mr.
Representative?
Chairman, thank you, Representative Yin. I've worked on this bill. This is the fifth year that I know it's been worked on here. And I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, the reason for this, and the reason I did set the bar pretty high for that repealer, and I did that for a purpose. If some of you may recall, when this was presented before, there was one time we were establishing all the standing committees in statute. I thought about that. I had 2 years where I was no longer in this body, and I had lots of time to think about it. My concern was I felt like we were opening the door, that if somebody wanted to cause mischief, they might come in if things changed in this body. Somebody could come in and make a proposal to either do away with a standing committee, modify it, amend it to where it does something else. And so that's one reason why we pulled that provision out of this current version of this bill. But in the process, in the course of communicating with the attorney that was helping me with this, I was trying to figure out how would we go about protecting it so that in the event that, we all know that elections have consequences and things change. I would like to make sure that this committee is set up with the intent that it's going to be a long-term committee like all the other committees. And I think about it, what would happen if we had the ability to do away with the Revenue Committee, Mr. Vice Chair, that you and I serve on? If we could do away with that committee and replace it with the Savings Committee, and that's really what led to the genesis of this, but I hope that answers your questions. It's two-part. I wanted it permanent, and I do think it's important that we safeguard it so that it can last beyond somebody's, short-term intentions. I want this to be a long-term solution, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up? Okay, any other questions for Representative Ward? All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mr.
it.
Chair.
Are there any agencies here that would like to speak on this bill? No agencies? All right, members of the public, if you would like to speak on this bill, just approach. And what we'll do is, as we go down, each one of you introduce yourselves, press the mic till it's green when you want to speak. So whoever wants to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be before you today, and my name is Frank Ethorn, Chairman of the Wyoming Republican Party, and I want to give you a brief and general history, a little foundation here of what we call Republic Review. In the bill, it's referred to as Federal Review. This has been an ongoing goal for 6+ years, started in the grassroots, and that's who I'm here to represent, their voice to you. Fully concurring with the words of Representative Worf, that necessity has brought a large committee over these number of years to do the work, to suggest a bill and get sponsors through legislature, because we do believe that you do have more power than has been exercised under the 10th Amendment, the Wyoming Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution. And so with that, it started as the genesis was an idea of the state's power to push back against federal intrusiveness. And then how do we do that? Through constitutional channels, statutory channels. And so here we are today, and with this multi-year effort, now we have House Bill 177, and I just want to report to you that the state party, the Republican Party, the grassroots, has voted consistently to not just support the concept, but to make funds available and other efforts to communicate to the legislative body and the executive bodies that this is something we feel is necessary. And I will defer very important details to my esteemed colleagues to both sides, including the chairman of the Republic Review Committee, Tammy Young, and urge your support and ask if there are any questions for me.
Thank you, Chairman Eathorn. Any questions from the committee? No? Okay, we'll move on. Chairman Young?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tammy Young. I'm a resident of Worland in Washakie County. I'm a wife, a mother, a small business owner. I'm very actively engaged and deeply committed to the constitutional integrity of our state and our nation. I come before you today as a passionate advocate for the sanctity of our Constitution and the rights it guarantees every citizen of this state of Wyoming. And I'm here to voice my strong support for House Bill 177, which aims to establish a joint and standing committee on federal review. The bill aims to audit the state's relationship with the federal government. It's not just a legislative measure, it's a safeguard for our constitutional rights and state sovereignty. You are all aware, Representative Worf touched on some of the government's federal overreach that have expanded beyond their constitutional limits, which affects the powers, rights, and liberties of states and their citizens. And this overreach undermines the very framework of our republic, a framework that the Founding Fathers meticulously designed to ensure balance and prevent the concentration of power. House Bill 177 offers a practical and immediate solution to this overreach by creating a dedicated committee to review federal actions. Wyoming can assert its rightful role as outlined in our founding documents. The committee would work towards ensuring that any federal actions encroaching upon our sovereignty are identified. The goal of the committee would be to review, ascertain, make findings, and then report back with recommendations to our state legislature. The approach proposed by this bill aligns with the historic intentions of our Constitution, which recognizes states as sovereign entities, not merely administrative districts. This committee would serve both as a watchdog and a powerful voice, reaffirming that the ultimate authority over constitutional matters resides with the states themselves. This bill does not seek to amend the Constitution, it seeks to enforce it. It acknowledges that the Constitution itself is not the problem, rather the issue lies with unchecked and unchallenged federal overreach. The concept of enumerated powers that we the people have granted to our government is akin to assigning a limited power of attorney. In this analogy, the government acts like an attorney who is given specific limited powers to represent us in designated matters. If this attorney or our government begins to exceed those authorized powers, the solution is not to rewrite or amend the entire foundational document, which in this case is our Constitution. Instead, the appropriate course of action is to clearly pinpoint the overreaches, explicitly instruct the government to halt these excesses, and ensure compliance with the originally agreed upon boundaries. This focused and straightforward response effectively addresses the problem that ensuring that the government adheres strictly to the limits set forth by the Constitution. James Madison asserted that since the states are the sovereign parties to the constitutional compact, they bear the ultimate responsibility to enforce its provisions. In his writings, such as the Virginia Resolutions of 1798, he made clear that it is the duty of the states to interpose and act against federal overreach, ensuring the Constitution is adhered to as intended by its framers. I would urge each of you, as stewards of our state and guardians of our rights, to vote in favor of House Bill 177 by supporting this bill. Wyoming can lead the nation by example, showcasing our commitment to preserving state sovereignty and setting a precedent for other states to follow. Your support sends a clear message that respecting constitutional boundaries is not optional, but mandatory for the health of our republic. I thank you for your time, and I stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for testifying today and your interest and passion. Are there any questions from the committee? All right, moving on. Sounds good. Sure. Go ahead and state your name for the record.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's Carl Allred. I'm from Evanston, and I've worked together with several of these people on this committee for quite a few years on this. One thing that I have always grown up with is a pure love of the Constitution. And as, you know, it has been, for lack of a better word, perverted over the years. One thing that I've had several discussions with different people about, they always say, well, the supremacy clause says the federal government outranks the state in everything. And I said, no, you haven't read the supremacy clause. It says, in pursuant thereof. The Constitution of the United States is a limiting document. It is not open for everything. And the enumerated powers given to the federal government are limited and few. And as the 10th Amendment says, anything that is not enumerated to the federal government is retained by the states and or the people. Well, when we first started this country, we had, before the 17th Amendment, the reason why every state was equally represented in the Senate was those senators were selected by you guys. And that was to protect the states. While we have representatives who protect the people, or are supposed to represent the people, the senators protected the state. With the advent of the 17th Amendment, we have lost that. And we have seen, especially more and more in recent years, how that has affected us. Whether we look from the Department of Education, which mandates how we do public education in the state, that is not one of their jobs. We can look at, just as recently, while I was Secretary of State, the federal government came out with what's this called the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act. Well, you know, I talked with the governor and asked that we stand up as a state against that. It is a far overreach. For those of you that are familiar, Wyoming is one of the top 3 states in the country for business registrations. There's Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. And we're quick on the path to becoming number 1. Well, a lot of those that register to do business with our state are because we protect the corporate veil better than anybody. And this Corporate Transparency Act targets medium to small businesses. It doesn't touch the large corporations, and yet that would definitely be detrimental to our business registrations in this state. So it hurts our state. There's a large amount of money that comes into our state because of that. Again, that's the federal government overstepping their boundary. There's 1.5 million examples. If you even just look not that far off recently, in Little Rock, Arkansas, the ATF went in and over a paperwork issue, they did a no-knock nighttime raid on one of the most respected people in Little Rock, Arkansas, the general manager of the airport there. Well-respected, did everything within the law, and over a paperwork issue, they executed him. We almost had that here in Wyoming not that long ago. Same type of raid. You know, one thing that this bill, you know, in the past, some people have said, well, this is nullification and we can't do that. This is not that. What this does is it sets up that you as the legislature come together, you look at some of these issues from the federal government, and you decide. The legislative branch is the only one that is allowed to make law. When you look at federal government, Congress is the only one that can make law, not agencies. They can't make law, but we've allowed them to. I remember Wyoming was the last state to raise the drinking age to 21. And I know there was a lot of pressure on the legislature here in the state to do that. And the federal government says, well, if you don't raise that drinking age, we're going to pull your federal highway funds. Wyoming said, go ahead. And at that time in DC, it was spoken about in Congress. They said, Wyoming is worse than a foreign country. They just won't do what they're told. Well, you know, that's because Wyoming has the right to make their own laws. And whether we're holding up dollars for people to grab at, we still need to maintain that integrity. And again, this is your job. And we're not saying that it's nullification. It's that you look at these items, you make a decision, you make recommendations to the entire legislature, and then we're looking for a coalition of other states. We can go to the other states and say, hey, look, this is what we have found. Would you join us in opposing this? And so I would very much urge you all to vote for this bill. Again, this is just bringing up the issues. You guys look at it. If you don't think it fits the constitutional powers of the federal government, then say something about it. And that way we are not serfs of the federal government. Thank you. I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. Are there any questions from the committee? All right, thank you for coming to testify today. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. The issue in front of you is really, can we take on the supremacy clause of the Constitution? And I think we can. We got to be careful about it. I do support the bill. We have things like executive orders. They are not law. They are designed originally to tell the federal government how to do business inside the various departments. Then there's regulations passed by these departments. I had occasion across my career in the Navy as commanding officer to write what amounted to regulations, and they applied within the ship. But they could be taken on. So how does the federal government pull this off? Well, the enticements, you've heard people talk about it. I happen to remember the days when we had a 55-mile-an-hour national speed limit, and Wyoming tried to take that on. As I recall the history, Wyoming, the House came within one vote of, in fact, taking that on. You're talking about enormous amounts of money that would come into the state. So the issue, as I see it, is how do you provide careful review so that the things you do take on have merit and you have a chance of winning? Subject to your questions, thank you.
any questions for Mr. Winnie? All right, thank you for your testimony, all of you. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public here to testify on this bill? Actually, let's do, is there anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we do have at least one participant online.
Okay, we'll hold them there, but let's go ahead and do any organizations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in firm support of this bill. We just passed policy at our November meeting to support legislation like this, so that's why I'm here supporting it on behalf of my members. I definitely can't articulate the reasons as well as the previous speakers did in support of this legislation, but one thing additional I would like to bring up, we've had a lot of things like the Clean Water Act that would have had a lot of negative ramifications for the state of Wyoming. We were able to push back on it, but I think having a committee like this would have bolstered the state's position. The state of Wyoming joined in a lawsuit against it, and we were somewhat successful in it, but I think this is needed. We need to get pushing back harder against the federal government, the things they're doing out. It seems like to me, especially out here in the West. I look at how many sawmills we used to have across the state. We have 3. That's really hurt the natural resource management in our state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, sitting in firm support of this legislation, I would take any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? No? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, just one thing that.
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy, that's over in another committee, asked me to show that one of the organizations that he represents also supports this bill. To piggyback on my testimony, so he,
Okay.
as I say, he's tied up in another committee, can't be here, but one of the organization he represents is in strong support of this legislation.
And what organization is
It's
that?
either the agribusiness or the crop improvement. I didn't get a text back from him in time to say which one, but
We'll just say it's
Mr.
both.
your words, sir. I'll tell him that's what I was told.
All right.
And if
Thank
there's no
you.
questions for me, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, if you could let our online person in, and who is that?
Mr. Chairman, Scott Brown.
Scott Brown? Okay, thank you.
Hello?
Mr. Brown?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. We can't see you, but we can hear you. Do you
Okay.
have testimony that you want to give to House Bill 177?
I do, and thank you for this opportunity. And I'll make this short. I just want you to know that there's a lot of people here at home and I am from Bighorn County, sorry. There's a lot of people that they can't make it down there to the legislature that are very much in favor of this bill. And I would just agree with everything that's been said by the other testimonies. And I would yield for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Are there any questions from the committee? No, we appreciate you taking time out to testify.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. Okay. Any other members of the public online?
Mr. Chairman, no.
None here. I will close public testimony. And committee, what's your pleasure?
Could I ask a question?
Who's your question of?
I think it might be for the bringer of the bill.
Okay, we'll let you take one bite at the apple here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
Representative
Representative.
Worf, how would you envision this committee, if approved, would get its material for review and discussion? It seems to me there's an awful lot of that, and so how would you envision that would happen? I'm just curious.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Lucas, for the question. I believe we'd function just like all the other committees. I think those people that are assigned by either the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, those that are assigned to this committee would bring forth bills just like we do. They would have the ability for their constituents to identify things and say, these are things we think should be looked into. So I think it functioned just like all the other committees do. And I think there's plenty of opportunity. There's a federal review that they publish that is a monstrous book, but there's plenty of avenues for us to get information. But I think it would largely come from the citizens of the state bringing forward areas that they've experienced, and those members serving on the committee would bring forth that information, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Public testimony is officially closed. We had a motion from Vice Chairman Locke. Was there a second? Representative Johnson, second. All right. Let's go through the bill since it is multiple pages. Are there any amendments to the bill on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Any amendments on page 4? And page 5? All right, no amendments to the bill. The bill being before us, would you please do a roll call vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on House Bill number 177, Statutory Standing Committee, Federal Review. Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Locke,
Aye.
Representative Heft,
Aye.
Representative Johnson,
Aye.
Representative Lucas,
Aye.
Representative Webb,
Aye.
Representative Weber,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
No.
Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 ayes, 1 no.
Okay, with a vote of 8-1, House Bill 177 does pass the Corporations Committee. And for those that came in to testify, thank you very much. I appreciate that and good words. All right, next up for the committee is House Bill 206. Elections, acceptable identification revisions 2. And Representative Weber will present this.
Mr. Chairman, we do have 2 handouts for this bill. One of them was included in your folder. It's from AARP. The other is from Representative Weber. I'd like to pass those out now if I could.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, Representative Weber, welcome to your own committee. Just introduce yourself for the record, and let's go ahead and start by introducing us to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members and everybody in attendance. My name is Nina Weber. I am the representative for House District 24. It sure is nice to be presenting a bill in my own committee. I appreciate my fellow committee members who are co-sponsors. This is a straightforward bill, a simple bill, a common sense approach to identifying a person to vote in our Wyoming elections. Identification depends on recognition. If you want to identify somebody, it is normal and usual to use a photograph. We recognize people by their face. A Medicaid and Medicare card do not have that. They only have a name. If I travel or fly to Washington, D.C., TSA requires a real ID, driver's license, or a passport with a photo. Not accepted is a Medicaid or Medicare card. I also have to show my driver's license to pick up a prescription, cash a check, check out a library book, purchase tobacco, and even go into Sam's Club. A photo ID is required for everyday living. I asked some of the county clerks if the Medicaid and Medicare cards were used as ID to vote in the last elections. They said no. I, as a former county clerk, the number of people who I saw use a Medicaid and Medicare card to vote was 0. So, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and all in attendance, House Bill 206, Elections Acceptable ID Revisions 2. Let's go through that. On page 1, the first few lines say a photograph is required and acceptable identification for voting. Moving into the bottom of page 1, going into page 2, will be the definitions, specifically the acceptable identifications. On Part A, Part B, adding the following language, provided that the ID includes a photograph of the person. And at the bottom of page 2, this section repeals the use of a Medicaid and Medicare card as acceptable IDs and enacting a effective date of July 1. This bill is saying that we are looking for an image to identify the person in front of us who wants to vote in our Wyoming elections. I would stand for any questions if there are any.
Committee, are there any questions for Representative Weber? I just had one. I know that one of the concerns throughout the United States now is that other states are issuing Medicaid, Medicare cards for non-citizens or illegal aliens. Have you heard anything about this, and how does this apply to your bill?
I have heard about those types of things happening, and we don't want them happening here. We'd like to repeal the use of Medicaid and Medicare cards, and that's what this bill will do. We need a photograph ID to say, hey, this is my face, this is my name, this is who I am. I'm here to vote.
Thank you, Representative. All right. Are there any agencies that, or actually Secretary of State Gray, would you like to comment on this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And Representative Weber did a great job on that run-through. And again, to sort of set the stage for this, we talked a lot about improving voter ID last week. This is another bill where we're strengthening voter ID, and I'm very proud of voter ID that we passed in 2021, but it was a sausage-making exercise, and there were some things that came in, Mr. Chairman, at the end that were some concessions, but then also things that maybe we always intended that, as we showed that voter ID could be done, because as often happens, there was a lot of concern that, well, could this be done? Could it be implemented? And it's gone off without a hitch now for 4 elections, 2 full election cycles, 4 total elections. And now we're coming back and strengthening voter ID and maybe around the edges kind of fixing some of the things that maybe aren't appropriate anymore. And so that's what we're doing here. The bill really does 2 things. First, it repeals Medicare and Medicaid insurance cards as forms of acceptable proof of identification to vote under Wyoming's current voter ID law. And under current statute, these are already set to be repealed on December 31st, 2029. When we did this, we insisted on a sunset. But I think that with the way voter ID has worked, that we can remove this provision a little earlier. And that's what we're doing here. And second, it specifies that the remaining forms of identification for voter ID, which include a Wyoming driver's license, a tribal military card, a driver's license or ID card issued by any state or outlying possession of the U.S., et cetera, must include a photograph of the person. And that's the reason why they're together, is because the Medicare and Medicaid card does not have a photo. So we're removing the Medicare and Medicaid card, and then we're also further stating that any other ID that is on the acceptable list has to have a photo. And the main thing you're effectuating with voter ID, which of course is different from the voter registration process, is stopping voter impersonation. That the person who is showing up to the polls and saying, I'm John Smith, and they find them on the voter rolls, that is indeed John Smith. And the way to effectuate that goal is to have a photo on the ID. Without a photo, you can't do that. And so not having a photo on the ID really flies in the face with one of the key purposes of voter ID, and that's why we need to fix this issue. This is good policy. Speaking to Medicare and Medicaid cards, these are 2 forms of identification, which again, do not contain a photo of the person, which is a real weakness. And then also, as you really brilliantly brought up, Mr. Chairman, there are states that are issuing, that are allowing Medicaid coverage in illegal alien situations. So that's another issue. The other issue is they can be reproduced pretty easily, very similar to the discussion we had last week on the student IDs. But I would say these are even easier to reproduce, although both are pretty easy. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, of all the states that require voter ID to vote, Wyoming is one of 3 that does not require photo ID to vote. NCSL notes that while some might call Wyoming's law a strict photo ID state, because most voters will show a photo ID before voting, however, until December 31st, 2029, Wyoming will accept Medicare and Medicaid ID cards as valid forms of ID for voting, neither of which contain a photo. Arkansas, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, and Wisconsin have strict photo ID. And you probably remember after the election, there was a graph going around on states that have photo ID, states that do not have a strict photo ID requirement, and then states that have no voter ID. and it was going around X, and Wyoming is not in the strongest we could be on that group, and that's what we're trying to effectuate here. Now, ARP has reached out to our office, and look, always appreciate working with Mr. Laycock on voter ID. He was pivotal in the conversations in 2021 and 2020. And I know he's going to come up here and present, and I appreciate him meeting with our office. He's going to present a hardship clause sort of carve out. But our office, I'm opposed to that concept. And I think that it really weakens the voter ID statute. And I think that what we did to address the hardship clause, it was actually an amendment brought by later Speaker Summers. And it came after the agreement on a lot of this stuff that weakened voter ID. He put in an amendment that anybody can achieve a state registration card for free for purposes of voting. And it was a great amendment that he came up with. And it came after we had these conversations and put in the Medicare and Medicaid card as acceptable ID until 2029. But that really addressed that hardship issue. It was a very good amendment, and it came on, I think it was second or third reading on the House side on House Bill 75 in 2021. And that's the answer, rather than having this carve out, which builds, I mean, who knows? I know they say that it's only going to be used 50 to 100 times in the state. I think that's a total estimate. I don't think there's any guarantee on that. And it basically does away with the requirement and turns it into an attestation if somebody opts into that. And with that, it basically does away with the infrastructure of voter ID. And I don't think it's the way to go. So I'm very in support of this bill, House Bill 206, and it's very important that we continue to strengthen voter ID.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our chairman asked a few minutes ago, first of all, thank you for being here,
Yeah, thank you.
Secretary. Our chairman asked a few minutes ago if there were any Medicare cards being given to illegal aliens in the country. Do you know anything about that yourself?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and
Mr.
Representative
Secretary.
Brown. I think in the context of Medicaid, I believe California has debated, and I believe they did pass the bill extending it. Was last year, correct? I'll have to double check on that, but,
Thank you.
and that's Medicaid.
Any other questions? Mr. Secretary, I just have one, because we will hear from AARP, and it is always a concern that people have the right to vote, that they don't feel disenfranchised to vote. So you mentioned, I think driver's license would be one, but you mentioned the Wyoming ID that was created for such purposes too. Do you think that would solve the senior aspect of this, being able to vote readily?
Mr. Chairman, I think it does. I think that being able to opt in, and I've seen it when I go and get a driver's license. It's very clear that you can receive a Wyoming ID if you renounce your license, or if you don't, for free for purposes of voting. And that's pursuant to the statute. And I think Driver Services has done a great job in getting the word out there on that. And I think it's proven to be a really strong part of the statute that came on the floor after a lot of these concessions had been made. And I think it's kind of was a more direct way of addressing that concern.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Secretary, appreciate it. All right, is there anybody from an agency? Yes, Mary, you want to go ahead and come up now? This will be the Campbell County Clerks Association. Please identify yourself. Or not the Campbell County, that's where I'm from. We'll just say.
Good
I'll just say the
afternoon.
Clerks Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the County Clerks Association. My purpose here today is to focus on administration of Wyoming elections and voter ID. In Wyoming, Medicare and Medicaid insurance cards are the only in-person voter ID that is required to be produced immediately before voting that has no photo ID. They are slated to be repealed on December 31st, 2029, and this bill would expedite that repeal to July 1st, 2025. Clerks have done some recent research on current use of these cards, and it's difficult to know how many people will be affected. In reviewing the 2024 election season, it could be as small as several hundred qualified electors statewide. Unlike student IDs that we discussed last week, these qualified electors have no other forms of ID, and it is difficult for them to get a government-issued photo ID. However, if it is just one qualified elector who is denied the right to vote, that's unacceptable. In other states, accommodations have been determined to assist those without photo ID by means of declarations or an array of other documents providing proof of identity. This could be a workable solution for Wyoming voters. That small group of folks that could be seniors, veterans, or folks that have had documents destroyed. There's a number of issues. The group would be very small, but some sort of a solution would be important to catch that last small percentage of eligible voters, qualified electors, to be able for them to vote. With that, the Clerks Association would be supportive of any of those kinds of solutions or that solution that may be offered to you here in a little bit that would allow qualified electors to vote. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Langford? I just had one. Has there ever been an attempt, or do we push through our clerks' offices, Wyoming ID drives with senior centers or senior apartments or anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, not as far as the clerks are concerned. I know that ARP has been really active to get their folks, and I think part of the reason why the bill was built the way that it was to give us sunset on the use of these cards was to get those folks to get Wyoming IDs for free. And I think that actually has shown to be happening. It may make sense to let it happen for a little while longer to get that cycle to move to those photo IDs. But our greatest concern is the fact that we don't want to leave anybody out. We don't want to exclude anybody from the right to vote. These people are registered voters. They are registered voters. They just don't have a photo ID. And as you get on in your years, you tend to lose that stuff as time goes on. People don't drive, people lose their sight, they don't have driver's licenses. Some of those issues, you'll hear about that. But those are the folks that we're worried about, is whether that we can get somebody that is truly a qualified elector to be able to vote, but to deny them just because they don't have a picture of themselves. It's on a government-issued photo ID.
Thank you very much for your testimony. All right, are there any other members of the public? Any other organizations? Mr. Winnie, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I would remark that the election judges out in Bondurant know exactly who I am. And so presenting an ID there is pro forma, but I do, and I typically show them my military retired ID. I have to show that military ID to get on F.E. Warren Air Force Base and other military facilities. And frequently, particularly at some restaurants, they have a veterans discount, and I'll show the ID for that. And sometimes they say, well, you don't really need to do that. And to which I say, look, there are those out there that would fool you. And so I don't mind showing it. Of course, I have the Wyoming driver's license, pretty good, pretty secure item, but sometimes I have to show that in conjunction with other things. I'm a FAA certificated commercial pilot and a FAA certificated flight instructor. And whenever I present either of these two ID cards, I have to present another photo ID. And so as I look at this, it is important that we provide those free of charge to those that do not drive so that they can be properly identified. But to me, when I look back at this country from the perspective of being on a submarine 1,000 miles at sea and doing the kind of things we do, it's extraordinarily important to me that I be confident that the people sending me out there were properly elected. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Representative Lucas? And just to be clear with the committee, we are running short of time. So I'm going to limit conversation, but, and is there anybody online as well?
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 individuals online.
So, okay. All right, Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Winnie, just quickly, is the FAA card not, must be accompanied by a photo ID because it doesn't have a photo?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead.
Chairman Knapp, I'm Tom Laycock with AARP Wyoming. I know there were a couple of people that were online. I'm happy to be here Wednesday. If you're short of time, if you want to go to them first, by all means, you figure out how you want to run your meeting. I just didn't know about their time.
Why don't you go ahead, but just limit it. I think we're going to try to wrap this one up here, so.
Okay, very good. Chairman Knapp, committee, it's good to see you guys again. Thank you for the time. I very much appreciate it. See, I got a smile on my face today as a Philadelphia Eagles fan. It's been a good weekend. So, hey, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the voter ID bill that we've got in front of us today. Here's a few things we know. The current voter ID is something Wyomingites understand. It's something that they respect. In fact, University of Wyoming did a survey this last year. 92% of the people that they talked to actually understood it and found it expressed satisfaction with those rules as they stand. Now, AARP Wyoming is not voter ID. In fact, as the Secretary so well mentioned, we worked with them the first time around when we were working with photo ID. In fact, if you look at our front page of our website, you'll see a story that we wrote with Misty Zimmerman from YDOT, who, by the way, is a saint, about how to make sure that you get an ID, how to make sure that you keep an ID. Because what we found is older adults, 1 in 6 in this country, stop driving, put the ID in the drawer or give it to a son, a daughter, and then don't have anything with them. And they don't figure we don't need anything, things along those lines. And so really what we try to do is we offer some sort of hardship that could be out there for those folks who maybe struggle a little bit. You know, we heard comments today that you need a driver's license to rent a hotel room, get on a plane, things like that. Most of the people that we're talking about that we're concerned about haven't gotten on a plane in decades. We're looking to give a hardship to some of those folks who might be struggling a little bit to be able to get to YDOT. Secretary Gray mentioned a little bit about the NCSL website when he was talking about how great the current voter ID bill is working thus far. On that website, you're going to find a comprehensive list of each state's voter ID requirements. Now, what he didn't mention is that website also lists hardship clauses that each state offers for those who can't find a photo ID. Now, there's a continuum there. Some states allow for a credit card or a piece of mail. It's probably a little bit lax. Other states, like the state of Idaho, offers an attestation with the perjury under threat of felony offense. So that's kind of interesting. The proposal we brought before you today is actually one that would do away with Medicare and Medicaid cards. And this is similar to what they use in the state of Texas. So we have a few areas where we think this might fit the statute, but let's talk conceptually before we worry about where we're going to move this in. So I'll read this to you. Voters who do not possess an acceptable form of photo ID and cannot obtain one of the forms of acceptable photo ID due to reasonable impediment may vote provisionally and present supporting form of ID and execute a reasonable impediment declaration, which includes the voter's last 4 of their social, noting the voter's reasonable impediment to obtaining an accessible form of ID. Now, this is in front of you, I do believe.
Mr. Laycock, since we do have it in front of us, do you want to kind of summarize the page for us
Absolutely.
since we do have it to read?
Yeah. So the thing that we do really here is if someone is struggling to get a photo ID for some reason, whether it's someone in a nursing home, someone who's homebound, we put this reasonable impediment declaration in front of the county clerks. Let them vote provisionally, because the fact of the matter is, if there's somebody who's struggling to get an ID in Platte County, Malcolm Irvin's going to know who it is. If it's someone who just doesn't want to get an ID, if it's me walking up and saying, hey, I want to fill out one of those forms, Mary Langford's willing to say, Tom, don't be an idiot, go get an ID. So there is a process for that. We also allow for a process here suggesting any county clerk decisions may be appealed to the state canvassing board. So really, that's what we're bringing forward today. In closing, I've sat in a number of hearings in this room where we talk about the need for election integrity, and each one tends to have a line that goes something like this: if even one ineligible voter votes in a Wyoming election, it's one too many. We agree with that. We also feel if even one person loses their ability to vote, who has been casting ballots for the last 50 years, we think that's one too many, and we assume you do as well. So that said, happy to answer any questions or turn it over to my friends to the left.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Okay, you have approximately 1 minute each.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Marissa Carpio. I'm with the Equality State Policy Center. For over 30 years, we've been focusing on fair elections, and I'll try to move very quick. I had a handful of data points that I'll try to gloss over and just get our point across that while well-intentioned, voter photo ID laws unfairly burden vulnerable groups like seniors, people with disabilities, and low-income voters. The Equality State Policy Center would support an amendment with a hardship exemption, which is both normalized among other states with strict voter photo ID requirements. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Questions? All right, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick as well. My name is Micah Richardson. I'm with the Wyoming Women's Foundation, and we have some concerns with this bill due to the elderly women out there and their access to voting. So as has been noted, driver's licenses are tough to come by, and sometimes there have been things suggested such as mortgages, bank accounts to be shown in tandem with some other proof. However, a lot of elderly women are not on their mortgages, are not on their bank accounts, all of that sort of thing. So we would be in support of a hardship as well. We have also thought about the idea of, could it be something that they present their Medicaid or Medicare card alongside a billing statement or an explanation of benefits, so that you're seeing both things with their address in tandem. That's about it. I think that's pretty quick. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we
Go
have
ahead.
2 individuals online. I've admitted both of them. They should be coming up
All right.
immediately. Ms. Reisland, you should be able to speak now if you'll unmute your microphone.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I am the chairwoman for the Mayor's Council for People with Disabilities and also a member of AARP. I'd like to speak to this House bill primarily because I don't know that the committee members understand how many people would be impacted by this. So we do all know the population of Wyoming, 587,618, but we may not know the numbers of people who are over the age of 65. 19.2% according to 2004 stats. So 112,823 people. Out of that, over 35% have a disability. So approximately 39,488 people are over the age of 65 and have some sort of disability, whether that's cognitive, visual, auditory, ambulatory. Basically, we don't walk as quickly as we used to walk. Takes us a little longer to get there and a little longer to do things. And we may not hear as well when we do get there. That said, we want to make sure that there are as few barriers as possible for all people in Wyoming who are eligible to vote, and that there's no undue restriction or burden placed on voters that would prevent them being able to vote. It's really important for us to consider members of our communities who have different levels of abilities, but still have a right to vote and are eligible to vote. How they identify themselves, as the previous speaker just mentioned, is an issue. They may not have a photo identification. And if they do, they may have many other types of identification, but they may not have a physical photo identification. And that's a concern for us. We want to make sure that people of all abilities have the option and the opportunity to vote in every election. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you, Ms.
stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reisland. Is there any questions? All right, thank you for testifying. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our last public testimony online.
Ms. Tucker, you can go ahead and unmute now to join the meeting.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Knapp and committee members. My name is Julie Tucker. I'm presenting as myself and as a person with a disability. I'm concerned that people who are disabled may not be able to get somewhere to obtain an ID because they are bedridden or have no capability to get to a place where they can attain a picture. As you know, this is a very rural state, and getting a 90-year-old grandpa or grandma into town from the ranch over a dirt road for miles and more miles to town is more than they can stand. My mother is 96, and there is no way she could do that. What about the person who is confined to a care center because of their severe disability? These are our most vulnerable citizens, and you're trying to disenfranchise their right to vote. The Americans with Disabilities Act, under Title II, says reasonable accommodations should be made so they are equitable to those without disabilities. Let me tell you some things I found out about absentee voting, and I'm going to shorten this for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Tucker.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Georgia requires all the same things we do, although they do allow student IDs. Documents that you can show, though, are your name and that such. You need to have a name and address. And they will take utility bills, bank statements, paychecks, government checks, or other government documents. They also list voting assistance for people with disabilities. Tennessee voters who are in a nursing home or assisted living center, someone from the state comes to each type of place so residents can vote there and don't have to leave. Voters who are hospitalized will not have to, will need an exemption, as will religious objection to being photographed, which I never heard before, but I do understand. A permanent ID license is available to any resident who is intellectually or physically disabled. The person would need proof of identity and a doctor's note saying they are unable to operate a vehicle. So
Ms. Tucker,
Medicare and
thank
Medicaid
you.
cards are do
Ms.
not seem
Tucker.
out of place at all. If there are not other provisions provided, people will be foregoing their constitutional right to vote in Wyoming. Thank you for letting me testify.
Ms. Tucker, thank you for your testimony. You listed some good examples, and I think some of those actually we do also here in Wyoming, but are there any other questions for Ms. Tucker? Okay, thank you. Thank you for testifying.
Thank you, sir.
All right, with that, I will close public testimony. And what is the pleasure of the board? Okay, Representative Johnson and Representative Lucas with the second. Are there any amendments to the bill? Minority Leader Ian.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move, I mean, basically as a proposed amendment, I guess, the AARP handout as an amendment to the bill.
All right, is there a second? That amendment does not pass due to a lack of a second. Are there any other amendments? All right, seeing none, please poll the board on House Bill, on this House Bill 206.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on House Bill 206, Elections, Acceptable Identification Revisions 2. Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Locke.
Aye.
Representative Heft.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Webb.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Representative Yin.
No.
Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Chairman, 8 ayes, 1 no.
Having received the proper votes, House Bill 206 has passed this committee. Representative Weber, I assume you're going to be handling this on the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. With that, we will move the last bill 176 to our, or is it 176? Yeah, 178 to our next meeting Friday. And if there's no other business, this committee is adjourned. 3 bills. 3 bills. I thought Jens was on. Oh, that's all right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, just delete the amendment, but do you want any other,
The only other thing that there was a discussion about is the work of their staff, their election staff.
yeah,
We could have that on.
could I say officially appointed election staff of the clerk? Okay.
That would take care of the employees as well as election judges. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right.
I'm just trying to make this issue out.
I'll just tell, because we kind of accidentally did that one, and so,
And then I just wrote these as little notes. Right here. We did talk about it.
okay.
The problem with it is that you have changes.
Right. As well as all the checks in there.
Sure.
Didn't realize it was going to take that long.